speaker series, which has really featured topics and speakers from different genres. So we started off talking about how COVID's been impacting the comms industry. We spoke about ethics. We've spoken about public policy and public affairs and the impact on the U.S. elections. But today, more importantly, we're going to talk about a topic which is personally close to me, and also it's on the eve of the Mental Health Day, which is tomorrow, which is around mental health. We've got two wonderful speakers today. We've got Rachel Royall, who's the Director of Health, Wellbeing and Life Sciences at Markettiers. Prior to Markettiers, Rachel was the Director of Comms for IBM Health and Life Sciences and NHS Digital. And she spent much of her career in central government and health comms, including the NHS, HM Revenue and Customers, Cabinet Office, as well as Department of Health and Social Care and Local Government. We also have with us Joe Twistleton, Director, Twist Consultants. For the last 16 years, Joe has been advising and coached leaders and managers, especially those with technical background and under pressure to deliver big organization change and change well using communication, coaching, and well-being approaches. So Joe's really been focusing on the importance of building a good well-being practice and resilience to help our clients navigate. So before I hand over to Rachel and Joe, just some housekeeping rules. I think if you have a question, do pop it into either the chat window or do a digital hand raise. And we're going to keep everybody on mute except the speakers. So if you do want to talk, just raise your hand and we'll come back to you for an answer. So Rachel and Joe don't have PowerPoint, so they're just going to chat to you. So it's going to be a very interactive session, hopefully. Rachel, Joe, back to you guys.
Thank you, Nitin. I'm going to start off. Thank you for inviting us to share our perspective on mental health and public relations today. The pitch that I want to make from the outset is that communication is critical for business recovery. And therefore, controversially, I'm going to suggest that we need to stop talking about mental health and start talking about the investment we need to make in the well-being of our PR profession for resilient business. I'll give you an overview of some of the statistics from the excellent work, both from the public PRCA and from the Chartered Institute of Public Relations. And they're the UK-based kind of professional bodies. Both have international footprints and work very, very, very closely with the ICCO. And they've done some excellent work in auditing and identifying where we need to act in relation to the mental health of the PR profession. And with Joe, you'll gain an insight into some of the helpful resources that are out there to help you individually, your team, and also your broader organisation. However, I don't think that's where we stop. In the Q&A, we'd love to get your thoughts as well on our broader responsibility as an industry. For me, public relations is a force for good. And in mental health campaigning, I think we have an opportunity as an industry to impact on the well-being of society and also to kind of change the nature of the debate. In recent months, our industry has been propelled front and centre by business, government and society, putting pressure on the professionals who provide communication advice and services. Faced with a global pandemic, we've all hungered for factual, trusted information from trusted sources. Businesses and the public sector have grappled with how to disseminate information effectively and at scale, with an almost apocalyptic ramping up of digital channels. Business survival has depended on the ability of companies to continue to communicate effectively and empathetically with customers and employees alike. The rise and importance of our trade has been felt across all sectors of the communication industry. For my area in broadcast, for example, during lockdown, a Havas Media Group survey found 64% of people were watching more live TV than before the pandemic. Some commercial radio stations have seen daily listenership rise by almost 50%, and the public have turned to traditional and trusted forms of media like the BBC rather than rely on social media for what they needed to do and when. For internal communications, businesses have ramped up daily briefings, online content, audio and video content, live streamed events. They've launched podcasts and other channels to effectively engage with their employees and customers. But what about the people behind the communication? So individuals, probably like you and me, working in media, public relations, internal comms, digital marketing comms. The challenge is that the rise in the importance of and the affirmation of the positive value of communication in business has had its consequences for the mental health of those individuals who are critical to delivering it. Yesterday, the PRCA, in partnership with Opinion, they published its research report that demonstrated that COVID-19 had caused significant stress to PR practitioners, with 90% reporting that they've struggled with their mental health. So that's pretty much all of us, right? A survey carried out by the CIPR's health group that explored the impact of the coronavirus pandemic on communications professionals as well. And unsurprisingly, the findings from that survey are very similar. It found that organisations placed a lot of value on communication during the pandemic. However, 82% of respondents answered yes to feeling a mental health impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. The collision of life and work, the increase in volume of communication needed, the diversification of channels, additional hours, health and safety fears, employment fears, homeschooling, anxiety over loved ones whose treatments may have been delayed, and all other eventualities have understandably had an impact on all of us. To give you a little insight into my own life, one of the things that I did quite early on, if everyone can remember homeschooling, is I tried to be really diligent, setting up a classroom, maintaining a routine. And as the weeks went on, that changed. During one of my calls, my children were seen jumping like lemmings from the roof onto the trampoline. On another, I was passed a note to explain that the cat was in the dishwasher. But according to the Washington Post, the average, I wasn't alone, the average length of an uninterrupted stretch of work time for parents and caregivers during COVID was 3 minutes and 24 seconds. On a more serious note, the week that we went into lockdown, my mum was diagnosed with cancer. So the impact of COVID on the care for people with non-COVID conditions was brought home to me with a bang. But mum wasn't the only one. A woman in the UK prior to COVID was diagnosed with cancer every 10 minutes, and cancer research referred to the devastating impact on cancer referrals, diagnosis and treatment. And this is one area where we absolutely don't understand what the full impact will be yet on these individuals and on people that are affected by these conditions. Whilst these anxieties are not unique to the communication industry, world-class communication is critical to post-pandemic business recovery. And there's no doubt that the best businesses will be investing in communication channels and resources, but they also need to be investing in time in well-being. The PRCA report recommends that there's 3 areas of focus and action. The first is around sharing stories. The second is promoting existing initiatives or introducing new ones. The third is around learning from lockdown. However, we need to invest money and time to put in place the right mental health and wellbeing support for comms teams, to build resilience around the people who lead and deliver the communication strategy and processes for the organisations. And this is critical for business recovery. So I'm going to hand over to Joe, and Joe's going to quickly go through and talk to you about some of the practical resources, practical tips and things that you can invest your kind of time and effort in to help both yourself individually and also the organisations that you work with. Joe.
Thanks, Rachel. Great to join you today, and thank you for the invitation for us to speak. Just ahead of sharing some ideas, I just wanted to give you a little bit of context. We don't have children living at home, so we haven't had the trampoline experience. We do have a cat, but no dishwasher. However, I do run my own business, providing consultancy and coaching, as Nitin introduced, for organisations around large-scale organisation change. And at the start of lockdown, understandably, consultancy work around change kind of dropped off a cliff, where my clients' focus was pretty much all on the crisis. 7 months on, a little bit like every one of us, I'm still grappling with a level of uncertainty, not quite sure what's going on, and that's creating a little bit of underlying stress, which I'm sure that many of us can recognise too, and I know that that's going to continue for a while, so I'm just sort of trying to live with it. Now, for mental health and wellbeing, Rachel's talked about the impact for other aspects of healthcare, and I think this will be the same for mental health and wellbeing over time and in the longer term. And as Rachel has also mentioned, the investment now can reap a little bit of reward in the future, we think. So there's two perspectives I bear in mind when I think about this. Firstly, there's our role as employers and taking care of our employees and organisation. But the other role is looking after ourselves as leaders, and we can't forget that. Without it, we can't support others. And you've probably heard the phrase, put your oxygen mask on before you try to help other people. I use it, it's a cliche. It's a cliche for a reason. Equally, if we don't do that, we can't role model this for others. So with all that in mind, I'm going to share a few examples of practical resources and tips I've seen developed by some of the industry bodies in the UK, the PRCA, the Chartered Institute of Public Relations, and also some insight from the ICCO over the last few years. This fits into one of the 3 points that Rachel made about promoting existing resources. All of these things have helped to raise awareness of the issues related to mental health and wellbeing, and they offer practical tools, so stuff that we can all do something with. So here's just a few of those examples. ICCO has shared wellbeing pulse checks. I believe, Rob will correct me if I'm wrong, but there's a focus on this in the upcoming Global Summit in November, plus webinar on mental health awareness. PRCA has done some great work in launching toolkits with resources from UK mental health charities, Mental Health First Aid England, Mind and Business in the Community, as well as offering a partnership with Mental Health First Aid to offer that training for PR professionals. In CIPR, we've teamed up with Mind in the UK to provide skills, tools kits and webinars to again help to build understanding and awareness. And then just as lockdown started, CIPR teamed up with its charity partner iProvision and launched the mental health hotline. So this is something like you would typically see in the UK, for example, in large organisations as an employee assistance programme. It gives members access to accredited counsellors and support for people who are facing legal and financial difficulties as well. There's loads of advice out there and guidance from these bodies and from others as well. So I'd encourage you strongly to look at what's there. There's a huge amount of information and advice that can help. It's so encouraging. There's so much happening in this space. We've been talking about it before COVID hit, thank heavens, to make it okay to talk about mental health in the workplace and reduce the stigma associated with it. But as Rachel's mentioned, providing opportunities for people to share their stories, their ideas, their plans about how they're taking care of themselves, that can all help to make us feel that we're being heard and listened to, which is really positive. And it's important for employers and leaders to help to create the right environment where people feel safe and confident to speak up and share those stories. That's a completely different webinar because I think we could be talking about that for quite a while. We're doing some great stuff, but you've probably heard this phrase before: we're in a marathon and not a sprint. We've still got work to do. That's been highlighted by COVID and the big move for many of us to working from home or in disrupted situations. One thing I would encourage you to do is share with your peers and, if possible, your industry bodies about what's been working for you in your organisations, because I think the more that we can learn and share with each other, then we can help all of us with what we're trying to achieve. So finally, I'd like to say we're all communicators. That's a really good skill, especially in this situation. Helping people, including ourselves, understand that we're not the only person that's feeling like this and speaking out. I personally believe that communication is one of the biggest positives that we can use in wellbeing. We can be clear and honest as much as we can do in certain situations, about what's going on in our organisation, and keeping communicating can really help. So let's keep trying to make it okay to talk about wellbeing and to talk about asking for help. So with that thought, I will pass back to Rachel.
So there is a lot that we can be doing for ourselves and our teams, but one of the things that we'd kind of love to have a little bit of a conversation around is not only what you've been doing, but also, do we have a broader responsibility? So as I said when I opened, oh, I think we've got someone else in. As I said when I opened, for me, public relations is a force for good. And in mental health campaigning, I think we have an opportunity as an industry to impact on the well-being of society and change the nature of the debate. In broadcast media, for example, we've seen trends throughout lockdown that when producers have wanted stories, they've wanted to lighten the mood of the nation, stories that are pitched positively and that provide a kind of release, if you like, from the chaos of often gain traction and cut through. And for example, when we're talking about suicide, we know that using the right language when talking about suicide can save lives. So in the jobs that we're in every day, we very much have an ability to be able to influence this agenda and to influence wellbeing more broadly. So we'd love to hear your views, and obviously drop your questions in the chat box.
Great, thanks guys. Thank you so much for that chat. We have a question from Sarah. What small things can leaders do every day to look after themselves and their teams? Often it's the small things that can make the difference.
Do you want to go, Jo, or shall I?
No, I'm happy to go. I could be here all day, Nitin. There's probably two things that I'd probably say at the beginning. Check-ins at the start of meetings. I think we've been talking about this for quite a long time since lockdown started. Things that seem to work well is that check-in at the beginning of meetings. So how's everybody doing? One thing, I know we all get zoomed out, but having video on to see how somebody is, and not relying on them being on audio all the time. And also making it clear that there's space for confidential one-to-one conversations and signposting to somewhere else. If I think someone's not on mute, and signposting to somewhere else for resources that are available in the organisation if that's not the leader themselves. So they're the two things that spring to mind. Rach?
Yeah, the big thing for me is about role modeling. So I think how you behave and how you act is really important in the workplace. So one of the examples, I don't know about everyone else, but I monitor sometimes my steps on my watch, and on some days I've probably managed all of 1,000 steps. However, one of the things in terms of kind of sitting in front of the computer screens, and one of the things that I think leaders can do is role model. So an example would be to make a window in your day for exercise, and make sure that your colleagues know that you're making that window in your day for exercise, for example, and to role model that and explain that it's okay to have a 30-minute break in the morning to go for a run or to go and do some exercise. I think Mind today, I think they've launched a campaign called Just Do One Thing. And that would be my advice for all of us, to go back and role model one aspect of what you want to do throughout your day that promotes positive health and positive well-being, whether or not it's changing a video call to a telephone call so you can kind of walk and talk, for example. That's another one. Or taking time out of your day to do exercise, because we know that exercise, fresh air, getting outside, a change of environment is so important to well-being.
Right. Please do put in some of your questions here.
Nitin, can I just expand on something that Rachel said that links in exactly with what we were talking about? So that doing one thing is really key, because what you can ironically do is overwhelm yourself by introducing heaps of new wellbeing initiatives in your own life if you're not careful. So you can kind of scupper yourself before you've even started.
Okay, that's a good point. Okay, while we wait for some questions, I have a couple of questions for you guys. Tell me, how important or effective is it to train managers in empathy and kindness? And therefore, how does EQ basically come to say emotional intelligence help in tackling mental health issues?
100% it does. And I think all of these things, and this is in my opening bit when I said, should we, to what extent should we actually talk about mental health? We know that emotional intelligence just helps in all aspects of our working life. It helps in everything that we do. It helps to drive performance. It helps us to deliver projects more effectively and better for clients. And I think what we need to do around mental health is actually have some more of kind of the business lexicon around it, so that it's kind of more acceptable in what we do and it isn't seen as a separate topic or a separate issue. So for me, absolutely, emotional intelligence is kind of front and center. Understanding how people work, their motivations, what's going on at home. And that is all part and parcel of being an excellent manager and being an exceptional manager. And that's what we should be striving for, both individually and for the teams that we lead. So 100% emotional intelligence and training. One of the things we've done as part of the CIPR for the professional agenda as well, to this end, is to make sure that it's integrated in the continuous professional development program, so that as part of your professional development as a manager and a leader, you get points for investing in your emotional intelligence and also points for investing in understanding mental health, to the same extent that you do a technical competence in communication, like understanding journalism, writing, video production. So it's to give managers the equal merit that learning and understanding about people and learning how to interact with individuals, learning about emotional intelligence or mental health is just as important as the technical skills that you'll kind of learn along the way as well.
Great, thank you for that. Just one more question from me. I think, the PR industry couple of years back introduced something called the Helsinki Declaration, which was about a code of conduct and how we work with clients and our other stakeholders. Do you think, will a mental well-being code of conduct help largely for organizations and firms? Is just something which I've been thinking about. Should that be something we should, get in there either as a larger code of conduct or a very specific code of conduct?
It's an interesting concept. I haven't really thought about it, Nitin, but it would be, I think, in the same vein that Rachel was saying, is how can we kind of incorporate that into the wider business code of conduct, as again, not kind of taking it as a separate thing. Maybe we have to start it separately and learn how to develop it, to integrate it within business.
I agree. I think sometimes what's required is a separate code of conduct to make sure that it's a catalyst for change. But the right outcome for me in all of our professional codes of conduct would be to have that integrated into the membership, into the code of conducts that we have as a profession anyway, across the piece. So for us to review the professional codes, and we've probably had the same conversation over the years about ethics and how that applies as well. So maybe what we absolutely need to do as kind of a mental health cohort across the PR profession is to review the codes of conduct across the professions, and to make sure they don't exacerbate mental health issues, and they put good health and good well-being right at the forefront of professional development, because we know that will lead and help businesses recover. It will help build more resilience, and it will help all of us individually. We know that before the pandemic, I think it was something like 20% of people were taking time off work for mental health issues. 20% of people are diagnosed with a mental health issue. So the really important thing is that's a massive amount of our professional audience. So I think absolutely to review our code of conduct in light of mental health and well-being would be a brilliant initiative for us to undertake.
No, thanks for that. We have a couple of more questions. One from Ali Karam. Do you think having social media in our lives helps us keep mental health safe?
So there's an interesting question. I'd be really interested to hear what other people on the call think today. So if I can share my personal experience in the first few weeks of lockdown, I was on social media much more than I am now. And anecdotally, I've heard a similar story from many of my colleagues and friends. I think it's a force for good, but equally, it's something that we need to manage ourselves as part of our own well-being, to monitor that. So it's a very difficult question. There's a very fine balance here about how you use it, because it can exacerbate some challenges with mental health, but equally other people find it useful in terms of having an online community to find information and to share with different groups. One of the other things that I've heard has been really useful from a colleague of mine is, particularly with Twitter, she carefully curates her Twitter feed. So she manages to mute things, unfollow people, and to track news appropriately for herself. So it's a very good question. And I think, again, that would probably be another topic for another session, to be honest.
For me, there's a number of things to think about in this. I think social media is very much a double-edged sword, if you like. There are absolute positives and there are absolute benefits, but there is also an area where it's really difficult. And when you think of mental health as a spectrum as well, there are kind of pro-suicide chat rooms and things like that. So when we talk about social media, the spectrum of what we're talking about is vast. One of the trends that I talked about at the outset of my talk in relation to COVID in particular was a trend that we saw across society, where for trusted advice, we were not going to social media. And that kind of had changed, because for some time we were thinking and going to influencers, we were buying the products that they endorse, those kinds of things. But in relation to COVID, we saw that trend kind of backtrack, and we were reverting back to the trusted sources of information, because we knew it was kind of life and death. We want to get the right information. We need government advice. We need to know when we're going out. And it became slightly more directive in the messaging. So you've got social media in relation to, as a society with a big crisis issue, and how you manage a crisis issue. How is the information kind of distilled, and how do we access that information? You have that aspect of it. And then you've got your own social network, professional network, and the way that you interact with social media. And for me, my advice would be to make sure that you are consciously engaging in social media. So you're understanding who you're following and why you're following them. And you understand kind of the science, if you like, around the vacuum of information that you might be accessing within social media as well. So I think it's difficult to say that social media is either good or bad. It depends on you as an individual. It depends on your kind of tolerance levels. It depends on who you follow, who you don't follow. And it also, like so many things, depends on the balance of time of what you should be spending and where, and what's good and what's healthy for you. If you're sitting and scrolling down your Twitter feed, as opposed to taking 20 minutes out and going for a run, and then all of a sudden you don't have time to do exercise or be healthy, and I am guilty of that every single day, that is when it becomes unhealthy. And that is when I think that it's, we're not interacting in a way that is good for our own well-being, and we need to think about it in quite a different way, and in a conscious way, about how we interact with social media. So I think Sarah's popped some thoughts in the chat. So I don't know if Sarah's got anything to kind of contribute on the social media, because I know Sarah's a digital comms manager, so she's in it every day.
She had another question as well. She was saying that what ways can we consciously use our roles as a force for good in this agenda? So Sarah, do you want to give some thoughts?
Yeah, of course. So I think it's a really tricky balance, because a lot of the social platforms that we use are, of course, integrated. So if you take Facebook, for example, you have to link your personal profile to use it in a way that you can professionally. So having that intrinsically linked, it's very difficult to balance. And I think Rachel's right. You have to be very conscious about it and know what you're using it for, because it's it's a habit as much as anything else, and to break the habit can be very difficult. And I think it also comes back to where you spend your time and what you're doing, and it's about being conscious about how you spend your time.
There's one other point, if I can make, Nitin, which relates back to your point about emotional intelligence and just ties into what both Sarah and Rachel have said. So if you can increase your own emotional awareness of how you operate in certain situations, then that will help you to become more conscious in what you're doing and how you're responding to things like social media, and make you more intentional, which I think both Sarah and Rachel have covered beautifully already.
Yeah, well, that's a good point. Okay, any other thoughts or questions from anybody? Anybody else wants to give in their thoughts? Oh, another question from Ali. Do you believe public relations should fight against fake news to keep the public's mental health as well? Well, I think we should be fighting fake news anyway, but yes.
Great question. And you know, this comes, and I know that people have a very different view of the role of public relations. So some people feel that public relations needs to serve the purpose of the organization or the company that they're working for. And I think that's all very well and good, but I genuinely feel a little bit like nurses or doctors in their industry, and maybe I'm a little bit extreme in my views, but I absolutely believe that public relations has a bigger, bolder role to play. One of the most tragic kind of stories from last year for me, for example, was around Caroline Flack, if we kind of give that example. And I kind of think, you know, obviously being quite thoughtful in how we talk about it, but there must have been so many people that were involved in that process of supporting her or managing her or working with the organisation that could have prevented what ended up being a real kind of tragedy in relation to how she her journey and what happened in that situation. So I think we come across incidents in relation to either fake information, incorrect information, spun information. And I definitely think there is a huge argument to be made about not only do we have a role in the fight against fake news, but how does it fit with the ethics conversation and the kind of mental health conversation as well. So I guess in essence, I'm saying, yes, it should. The challenge will always be in understanding what is fake news and in whose opinion is it fake news, because we often know how tragedies are reported in different cultures, in different countries, in different ways, depending on the politics. And for me, sometimes what is the right information isn't always, doesn't turn out to be the right information given the benefit of time and hindsight. Mad cow disease is a great example of that. You know, what was fake news? Were people kind of making out that it was all a big issue for nothing, or were the government at the time correct in the kind of the propaganda that they were putting out in relation to that? So the challenge, I think, with fake news is knowing what is fake and what is the right information to be conveying to whom and to when. And we absolutely have a role to play in that.
Thanks for the detailed answer, Rachel. Any other thoughts from anybody? You want to give a comment or?
I'd be interested to hear what anybody on the webinar would think would be how we can use our roles as a force for good. I think Rachel's just outlined one. I think there's lots more. But Nitin, do you have any that you think would be?
I was just saying that I think the PR industry anyway has gone. Before the webinar started, I was chatting about the survey we did in India, and it has similar challenges like in the West. You know, the survey kind of talked about issues around work-life balance, around stress, around managing, a burnout in this time. So everything's been exacerbated. I think all we as people can really do is to, help people through the process. So we've got another quick question. So as from Chandrani, as a generation recovering from the stress of a pandemic, constant social media activity and work pressure, how can we retain our mental health balance in the best way?
Again, another massive question. So I'll try and share some thoughts. So this is, again, I mentioned it's going to be a marathon and not a sprint. So it's how, again, we can learn to understand how we best manage ourselves and listen to ourselves to be able to respond, as I said previously, in an intentional way. And there's a lot of discussion, or has been in the UK over the last few months. I've been having chats with colleagues about, we talk a lot about time management, but at the moment, a lot of it comes down to energy management. So where do we put our energy? Where do we put our attention? And where does our focus go to? So there's a lot more that we could cover in this. So it's understanding how intentionally we're putting our effort and our time and our focus. As Rachel said, if you are indiscriminately scrolling on Twitter, as I have done frequently, and suddenly find that you've spent 10 minutes that you've completely lost and you will never ever get that time back, you have learned nothing in the process except how many cats you can look at on Twitter, then there's something not quite, it's just, how do I get that balance back? And not telling myself off when I've done that and being slightly more self-compassionate has helped a lot as well. So there's quite a few things wrapped in there. There's stuff around self-compassion, about intention, and also just thinking about having an energy bank that you're drawing on every time you're doing something. So that's helped me. It's a work in progress.
And if I can add, I think different generations and different demographics have found different aspects of the pandemic stressful in different ways. The PRCA survey showed that 40% of us, our mental health has been enhanced from working from home, and 41% it's deteriorated. So we're not all kind of exactly the same, and we're not robotic. So what we need to do is we need to understand ourselves, we need to understand our own drivers, and we need to understand the organisation that we work in. And I'm not a great planner by any stretch of the imagination. I'm very intuitive, and I like to be quite, do things as and when. However, for me, that I know with my mental health, having a plan and investing some time in some structure and putting some structure around it really helps. So diarising when I'm going to go to the gym and popping it into the calendar really helps me, and really helps me to get the right balance in relation to the time that I spend at work and the time that I spend either relaxing, or the time that I spend doing exercise, or other things that I know help. I used to be probably way too much spending time on work. I am much better now at not giving myself a hard time for sitting down and watching Game of Thrones or Vikings or something on the TV, and that's okay. So the best way that I can suggest in relation to recovery is understanding yourself, understanding what motivates you, understanding your environment, and being thoughtful and making sure that you've got a plan that you've thought about, and it's okay to invest time in the things that give you energy and that make you happy, essentially.
So, I was thinking maybe we can just go around the table. Anybody has any other thoughts? Sarah saying she definitely recommends watching The Good Fight.
That's what we should do. We should start with the wellbeing movie list of all of the different things that we should be watching to improve our wellbeing.
Any thoughts? Rob, we can unmute people if anybody wants to have a chat and, give their thoughts and views. Nope. Chandani, do you want to say anything? Any thoughts, views? You're unmuted now.
I think I'm pretty impressed with the answers that I got from Rachel and Joe. I think that's the best explanation. Like, I guess we'll have to work on our plans and our goals while understanding that how we are going to balance it all out so that we don't let burnout and the stress of the pandemic get the better of us.
I think that's a really good point, actually, is no one's kind of written a rule book for how to behave in a pandemic. So we're kind of making it up as we go along to a certain extent and helping each other out with it. So I think you've got a really good point about making, understanding what works for you and trying things. Experimenting is really helpful at this point, and just understanding what works best for you.
I think like for everything, self-discovery is at the fundamental level. I mean, only then can we move ahead with the other solutions. Until unless we know ourselves, I mean, which is why emotional intelligence, I think, is more important, even more now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for that.
Okay, so if you have no more questions, I just want to thank Rachel and Joe for the time. We can give people back their 10-15 minutes. Mental health, mental well-being. So, Rachel, Joe, thank you so much. Very insightful, and I think it was a great discussion on mental health. Tomorrow is World Mental Health Day, so hopefully, sorry, somebody just messaged, Valeria. I'm not a PR professional, but I'm an HR business partner and have joined to understand how I can best support my colleagues who are in the PR industry. Thank you for your insight. Thanks for joining, Valeria. Thank you so much. So thank you so much. And please do, for those who are here, join us at the ICCO Summit, which is the 4th and 5th of November. We'll again be talking about issues, including mental health and diversity as well, and apart from other PR-related issues. So do join us. Bookings are open, registrations open on the website. So thank you. Thank you. Thanks, Rachel. Thanks, Joe. Thanks, Rob.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.